Welcome back to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we have an incredibly special treat. Our first in-person interview since the pandemic started. And in addition, a second guest who's joining us remotely from Dallas. So we're doing a hybrid podcast today, and we're going to be talking about one of the hottest topics facing almost every commercial industry right now, flexible spaces, flexible solutions. Today's guests, Jillian Brown and Charlie Morris, are both part of the Avison Young Flexible Office Solutions team. And I couldn't be more thrilled to talk to two thought leaders, subject matter experts on this very important topic. So let's not waste another second. Work Inspired starts right now. All right, Jillian, Charlie, thank you so much for being here in our first ever hybrid podcast recording. We're here in Chicago, and Charlie's joining us remotely from Dallas. We're super excited to be doing a podcast in the way that lots of companies are going to be conducting meetings now that we're coming out of the pandemic. So thank you both for being here.
No, excited to be here, and thank you for having me in person. So glad with the opening of Chicago that we're able to do this one-on-one and have Charlie chiming in remotely.
Well, yes, you bring up another milestone for us. This is the first in-person interview we've had since before the pandemic started. We did our first recording in person, and then we all went home for quarantine, and it's been all remote since then. So super excited that you're in our space here today, Jillian, and really grateful that you can join us as well, Charlie. Let's start by having you guys just give us a little bit of a background on your professional experience and kind of lead us up to to today, how you got here. And let's start with you, Jillian.
Yeah, great. So I will start, I won't go, back to where I was born, but, my first job, so to speak, I'm from Nebraska originally. So my first job was detasseling corn at the age of 13. You can do that, and it pays a lot more than babysitting. So that was great.
I know something about detasseling. My wife's from Iowa.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you get it. Most of the time I say that, and people just look at me with a blank stare. Yeah. So, through the years, and as I started in college and took jobs on there as well, I joke about it, but it's very true that I took jobs to get free things. I started working for a multifamily development of managing and leasing apartment spaces so I could have a nice place to live that wasn't in the dorm rooms. So I say that's, the first foray into commercial real estate. Then I started working part-time at Lifetime Fitness and to get, a free membership, which is great. $150 a month is hard to pay for when you're a college student. So started doing that and had the opportunity to move to Chicago to take on a role. I say Chicago, Schaumburg. I get scolded for that Schaumburg is not technically, that's a suburb. So I was working with Lifetime Fitness on the retention and sales management. And I say what's so amazing about that role in that organization is they did a phenomenal job from that hospitality side, the customer service, and just learning from a corporate organization how to work with the different departments. So worked with them for 5.5 years, and then, kind of took a step back to take a giant leap forward. So took a role with CBRE as a consultant. And this was really when I dove kind of head first into this flexible workspace, Workspace 360, whatever the word is exactly that you want to describe that as, working with their team when they were moving from the quote unquote traditional way of working to more of the open workspaces, dynamic workspaces, and had the opportunity to work with several different business lines within their organization of like what works for them, what doesn't work, the other groups that play into that, and what are clients seeing and how do they implement that into their space. So from that point, then I took a role with Serendipity Labs, who is an operator, flexible operator, who has a little bit different model where they do franchise locations, some corporate owned, some joint ventures. And, it was kind of like a startup, right, on steroids. So first worked with them of really ramping up, at a location in downtown Chicago. How do we increase demand? How do we get people in the space, increase revenue? And then how do we build this and duplicate this in other markets? So working with developers, franchisees, that took me to Washington, D.C. What was going to be 3 months ended up about 1.5 years. So I think we can all appreciate, with construction delays, that is not atypical. So worked with them and was able to, again, learn a lot of how to work within and all the different components that really play into delivering that end product. From there, I took a role with Convene, who started on the meetings and events side. I know Ryan Simonetti actually recently did a podcast. He's an amazing leader. With them, again, amazing culture, and they were building their workplace product. So focusing on the meetings and events and how do they integrate that workplace product and really kind of serve as a holistic option with landlords and developers for clients. Prior to the pandemic, what I was really looking for is how do I combine all of these worlds, right? So when you're working with a company or organization where you have a product, so to speak, it's almost like you fit in this box, and I'm not a person that typically like fits in a box very well. So I'm always like, what else can we do? Or why isn't this possible? And was able to connect with Charlie and the team of what they were building at Avison Young, and truly something, agnostic, holistic. We were able to work with occupiers, operators, owners. So started there March, spent one day in the office prior to shelter in place taking effect.
Wow.
But here we are today.
Yeah. Fascinating. And we're going to talk a lot about flexible working and what that means on this show today. But it's amazing that you've had experience in that, what's now a very, very hot topic, trend, whatever you want to call it, but from a whole wide variety of different positions, from big company like CBRE to a small startup, to a startup it's fascinating. So certainly an expert in what we're discussing here today, and something that a lot of companies are considering. Charlie, let's move over to you. You are the practice lead for flexible working solutions. Is that the full title? Office solutions?
Yeah, flexible office solutions typically, but we're definitely transitioning that more towards the flexible solutions because it goes well more than just office these days.
So how did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, so my backstory is from the professional side. I started my career in commercial real estate and the brokerage side of the business. It was on the tenant rep side is where I started my career at Colliers International. Spent, and all of this was in Dallas, I should say. Spent 7+ years at Colliers International. My focus was really in the, market that I'm sitting in right now. Behind me is uptown and downtown, like the greater downtown area. Which really means I was representing, professional services firms, law firms, consulting, financial services, et cetera. And really, that's where I really earned my stripes from that tenant rep side. I did transition to a company called Cassidy Turley, which has since been rolled into Cushman & Wakefield before they got acquired formally by the private equity group. I got recruited over to Avison Young. So I joined Avison Young as a principal in the Dallas office back in 2014. Whenever I got recruited over, I was pretty open and honest with local MD as well as our CEO, Mark Rose, that I wanted to really shift my focus because I had candidly, I was more passionate around some of the quote disruptive forces that were coming into the commercial real estate side. And that was coming in the forms of both flex office, which obviously we'll be talking a lot about, as well as the broader prop tech industry, how technology is impacting what we're doing, how our clients are utilizing space, how they're really performing. And I wanted to figure out how to get involved with that. So in my time at Avison Young, or right whenever I joined, I should say, I found out Avison Young had invested in one of these prop tech companies, a company called Liquid Space. And it was a company that I got to know the CEO really well. And over a couple year period, while I was still doing some quote traditional work from the brokerage side, I use that as a means to, as a differentiator, and think of Liquid Space as an Airbnb for commercial real estate, a marketplace to find flexible options for by the hour, by the day, by the month, by the year. I ended up helping them close their first sizable transaction with a product that they developed called Alt Space, which is, we'll be talking a little bit more about that as a product type coming available. And the deal was on behalf of Salesforce, who candidly was in the market with a competitor of mine. And they had approached Liquid Space saying, hey, you've been selling us that this is possible. And what they ultimately ended up doing is expanding into or wanted to move out of a Regis where they were operating from. And they were in the market for what was going to be a traditional 7-10+ year deal. And to accommodate 100 people day one, 150 people by year 3, 250 to 300 people come year 5-7. Liquid Space was tasked with finding them a space that could accommodate that 1 to 3 year plan. I was tapped with finding the supply for them. And ultimately what we ended up delivering is a space that they could move into. On day one, I negotiated the deal with the landlord on behalf of Liquid Space, who then sublicensed that space back to Salesforce. And we delivered a space that was 18,000 feet, delivered on 3-year term, zero capital expenditure due from Salesforce on the front end. And candidly, it blew my mind as to what was possible in the industry. And I really started diving even deeper into what was possible. Fast forward a year, I actually got recruited to Liquid Space directly, served as their director of business development. So my job there was engaging with the institutional owner community about how and why to engage in Flex. The second role was working as a transaction manager because I was the only one at Liquid Space that actually had a real estate transactional background as a technology company that they were. And then the third was broker engagement and education. So I got to engage with the CBs, JLLs, Cushmans, all these flex brokers that most people have never heard of, and really thinking and seeing how they're working with their clients, how they're exploring supply side. So I call that my Flex MBA, which leads us into kind of where we are now. I decided to leave Liquid Space for multiple reasons, but the main reason was I was putting square peg in a round hole a lot. Liquid Space has its role, and we can talk about some of their benefits later. They're still a strategic partner of ours. But at the end of the day, I wanted to be able to get back to my service roots, not a product-based offering where we were putting that square peg in a round hole. So what we've done here at Avison Young, whenever I got recruited back from by Mark Rose, our CEO, was, we wanted to build a world-class team, including subject matter experts, to really help clients reassess, and embrace these disruptive services, innovative offerings that are available in the market today. Ideally, what we're trying to do is create the core plus flex portfolio management strategy and or asset management strategy, whether we're talking about the occupier or owner. As Jillian alluded to, we're supporting enterprise occupiers, flexible operators, and institutional owners through an advisory and transactional based offering. But what we're doing differently is we're truly agnostic. We're not delivering our own product. We're not trying to sell you to push using an Avison Young branded product available in the market. Instead, we're leveraging everything that's available from the flexible operation locations, working with these different prop tech companies to think about how to support occupiers' portfolio strategies. So working with the owners about how to deliver the supply to adhere to what is going on today. And this vertically integrated team that we have, is able to maintain an agnostic position to utilize that service-based versus product-based offering to avoid any conflict bias and really make sure we're building bespoke solutions for our clients.
It's fascinating stuff. First of all, the episode we just released this week at the time of this recording was a commercial broker, one of the top brokers in the country in Texas. And we talked a lot about the impact that the pandemic has had on the residential market, which is obviously red hot right now, but how that's impacting the commercial market and workspaces and cities like Dallas and Chicago. And it's interesting how dynamic it has, how much it's changed actually since what traditionally has been the model where it's commercial and then the residential kind of follows. So lots to unpack and explore here. You guys are clearly experts and have great experiences and are thought leaders on the term flexible solutions. But for the average person, what does that mean? What's a flexible office? Is it a co-working space? Is it an office that can be reconfigured easily? Is it just flexible terms on a lease? How do you guys define flexible solutions?
Great question. And that, has continued to evolve and will continue to evolve. And people's perceptions or how they, what terms or what definitions come to mind when you say flexible office or can be all across the board, right? So that's typically the very first thing is like unpacking that a little bit and talking about, that evolution of flexible office solutions. So starting with, you have executive kind of work suite center. So your Regus premier offices, for one person and the dedicated space. And then you start to see the rise of co-working. So, have to give our props to WeWork for really, putting that out there. So you have the co-working provider. So whether that is your WeWork, your Spaces, your Serendipity Labs, several different incubators, that are here in Chicago. And then from there, what we started to see is more of these agile suite solutions. So those are larger, more customized customized spaces on demand. So, the company is able to bring in a little bit more of the culture, have larger spaces. So it's not just that co-working. It feels like their own space, almost like a spec suite on steroids, if you will. So we started to see that come out of it. And really, 2020 and beyond with the pandemic and everything that's been going on, we've seen the emergence of these mobile platforms or work from anywhere solutions. So that can be, your liquid space where you're able to book meeting rooms on demand. It can be, an up suite, a desk pass, a sauna, all these different, and then our job is to unpack all of this and say, client, where are you at? Here's the education behind it. Here's all the different things that are at your fingertips, and what solution, or typically solutions or mix of solutions, make the most sense for you. Right. And we are certainly not saying that traditional office is going anywhere. That's nothing that I think anyone on our team would ever say. There is a place and a need for that, and there is a right fit, but it's exploring all of the options, right? So anything across that spectrum of flexible office solutions, in addition to what Charlie phrased earlier, that kind of core and flex.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people now are thinking about flexible solutions and thinking about hybrid and, and a combination of working at a central hub versus working somewhere else. And the idea of a third space, I think what's fascinating is that you guys have been exploring this concept of flexible space for so long. It's not just 2020 and until now or into the future, but you guys have been experiencing it well before the pandemic. I think the concept, the conception was that third space was like a coffee shop, or maybe like an airport or a restaurant, a hotel lobby. Yeah. And clearly there's been companies like you just described with Salesforce that had, dabbled into co-working spaces or other kind of remote spaces outside of their campus or their central hub. But it does seem like that now is going to be something that more and more companies are looking to have an option for, because of their workforces maybe being more distributed than they've been in the past, where people have moved out of state during the pandemic and they said, hey, I want to stay here, but I also need somewhere else to go other than just my bedroom, And so when companies are looking for solutions, you talk about technology and some of the innovative technology that has come out of the last 15 months. And I think that that's probably providing a lot more options than ever before. But what are companies looking for when they say, hey, we need some flexibility? Are they just looking for something that's not a bedroom or a kitchen table, a place to sit? Or are they looking for, like you said, culture opportunities or connecting people for collaboration? Because those are the things that we are having a hard time getting at home, right? So are we able to kind of integrate those things into spaces that aren't the lockdown controlled traditional office space?
Yeah, and what, you hit on a point too. Companies were at various different levels or engagement with flexible solutions prior to the pandemic. You were seeing use cases as, it might be entering new marketplaces, or more as swing space, or for training room space, overflow space, if you will, or for those one-off areas where they had a few employees, but they didn't have an office, but they know that they needed something to go and they weren't quite sure what that would look like long term. Enter the pandemic, and the reasons and the use cases for why these companies are exploring flex spaces is very different now. So it includes everything that it included before, right? But also, there's much more of a focus on the people. So it's not just the places, it's the people. How do they want to work? When do they want to work? Where? How are they most productive? And then how do we as a company actually integrate this into our overall strategy and have some insight and build that culture and collaboration and ensure that our employees are, we're attracting and retaining our employees. So it's a mix, right? So now what we're seeing is, again, these companies and organizations taking a look at, it's kind of where are we at today, right? So it's that reset, reassess that Charlie hit on, is where are we at today? What can we change? What should we change? And what could that potentially look like in the future? And, the thing is and I know people hate it when we say this, but there is no one answer. So depending upon the organization, what types of employees or types of workers, what type of work are they doing? How do they want to work? Do you have individuals that want that 2 to 3 day a week, or other individuals that are like, like me, for example, like I would prefer to get out of my house, 4 to 5 days a week. I am more productive there. I know it. I need it for my sanity. So it's that individual basis. So how do you get all that information and then actually use that to build a strategy moving forward with things that you already had? And, at first too, all these companies are like, we need to get rid of all the space. Like we have way too much space. Or you might have had the opposite. Like we're going to give everyone more space, in the office. And so we need double the space. Yeah. And so what are the kind of goals and objectives there that you're trying to look for? And then how do we, again, like layer in those different solutions to ideally build that for you?
Right.
And take a look at it again in 3 months,
right.
6 months,
right.
12 months.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, right? I mean, like the reason there's no easy answer, the reason it has to be such a custom, personalized solution for each team and each company is that there's so many variables. The term flexible means so many different things, and it means everything right now.
Yeah.
You really have to look at all these different components. And one of the things you just alluded to was what the right solution is today is probably going to change in 3 months, as early as 3 months from now, and I think that's one of the reasons why companies have been hesitant to say, this is our plan, this is our strategy, this is what we're doing, is because especially up until now with guidance from the CDC and variants and everything with the pandemic, everything has changed so quickly. At least now there's hopefully some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. Like the vaccines have been rolling out. We're sitting here in person. So I think there's more strategies being written down, but there's still so many different components to flexible that I think that it's great that there's organizations like yours with knowledge like yours that can show the different options. And Charlie, I was going to ask you, as it relates, we can talk more about what it means for an occupier or a business that's trying to make these decisions, but for an owner of a building, obviously commercial real estate had a bit of a year last year where there was very few occupied buildings because we were all in our homes, right? Do you see a lot of building owners looking to convert some of their space into flexible spaces so that they can tap into some of this opportunity?
In short, the answer is absolutely yes. And one of the advice that we're providing to our institutional owners that we're working with is to candidly take back control of your own asset management strategy as it relates to how you're delivering flex. For the past decade, it's basically been, hey, let's go partner with WeWork, Industrious, Convene, name the brand. And, they'll be able to come into our respective space and, deliver flexibility within it. Each of these have continued to evolve their respective offerings, but co-working, as the generic term of co-working, has multiple different variants. Each of them have their own, product mix that they're delivering to appeal to a different type of clientele. And, our perspective with the ownership community is X% of your building should be flex. But co-working does not necessarily mean that is the ultimate strategy every single time. That may or may not be. Owners can and should deliver flexible strategies within their portfolio. And that could be a iteration of the agile suites that Jillian is relating to. It could be delivering, it's that spec suite on steroids, the best way to think about it. It's that private, secure space, including FF&E, furniture, fixtures, equipment, and technology, in order to, make that space turnkey, ready to go, something that people can be able to tap into on a moment's notice, move in the next day versus waiting the normal 30, 60, 90 days. Oftentimes it takes to do, even if construction's done, to get your space wired, to get your furniture delivered, et cetera. Things are evolving quicker. People's needs change by the day. So you can deliver these type spaces in conjunction with a co-working executive suite, some form of serviced office approach. And what this is doing is it's adding an additional layer. It can be, some owners are viewing it strictly as an amenity. To be very candid, some are viewing it as a monetization strategy, a profit center for them to be able to deliver. And the reason for that is they're able to, get a premium for that flexibility on the term length that they're providing to these occupiers, and, it could turn into an incubator. Not every company knows what they're going to be in the next 5, 7, 10 years. A lot of companies don't know what they're going to be in the next 5, 7, 10 months. So it's hard to commit to that long-term fixed core lease, as we call it, whenever you don't know what you're going to be when you grow up. And again, our perspective is that the fixed long-term leases, they're not going away. But why would a company commit 100% of their portfolio to that whenever they're not fully convinced to some of the points you're talking about right now? Is things could change in months, a year, like as employees come back or don't come back. Why would you commit to a long-term obligation where you have that lease liability on your books for a long term whenever you don't know if it's even going to be utilized? Because even pre-COVID, 50% of those spaces were not occupied on the daily. It depends on the company, obviously. 50, 60% is a common number you hear out there. So you've got a 40% number right there that is a given that you could rethink how you're delivering that type of space. And the ownership community is one that is obviously in control of the ultimate supply. And it's how you go and partner and bring in a flexible operator whenever co-working or executive suites make sense to deliver that type of product mix. But then how you can, leverage this in conjunction with your overall hospitality and, management experience. So you can create this integrated offering because you want to drive people to a space in your building. Because again, you want to have a ability to deliver optionality to satisfy whatever those needs may be, whether it's by the hour, by the day, or for a 10-year period, like the historic numbers are. We're continuing to see the percentages of these assets change, where I would say pre-pandemic, it was plus or minus 20%, depending on the owner that was willing to commit that towards flex or co-working, whatever the case may be. We're seeing some that are committing way more than that. We're working with certain owners that have 100% of their asset delivered to this. Why? They have proven that they can get a premium by delivering this versus just your, coupon clipping over a 10-year period. And, our perspective is it's just like Jillian's talking about on the occupier side, where you've got to, create a bespoke solution. Every asset may need to rethink whatever that strategy is. And it's really doing due diligence on what's available in the market, what that product or tenant mix that they're going after, and how do you then deliver the right product mix and solutions available within the building, co-working, agile suites, and combination thereof, in conjunction with your other amenity space. And integrating it all together is critical.
I was thinking this morning about what ride sharing and companies like Uber did for transportation and how disruptive that was to the traditional way of taking a taxi around. But then I'm also going to be closing on a house in 2 days, and I'm sure I'm going to walk in and be like, man, this is so antiquated that I'm sitting in here signing my name on 50 to 100 pieces of paper, So I know over during the pandemic, a lot of industries had a pretty seismic shift, whether it was healthcare and telemedicine or remote learning, in the education sector. Are we at a moment in time, Charlie, where the traditional way of leasing and thinking about either owning or occupying space is going to shift to become more agile, to become faster, to become more fluid, like you were just talking about?
In short, the answer is yes. Evolves, candidly, is really a function of that individual company, the employees that they have. One of the things that we're talking with a lot of, these large companies is whether they want to admit it or not, their employee now has a lot more control and influence on what their portfolio strategy should be today. We do, to your point here, everything else in our life have some level of potential digitization. We can go and get food delivered to our house in a moment's notice. Are we willing to pay a premium for that? Sure. Does that mean we're never going to restaurants again? Of course not. Why? Because there's an experience factor in that restaurant. And you want to go do that. You mix both of them together. And, some individuals will do more of one or the other. Some will only cook themselves all day long. Again, we can't dictate people about what their workplace, ideal workplace environment is, because every individual is, productive in their own right. And it's all about providing the ability to get an office, but not forcing them to go to the office, right?
Definitely. Jillian, tell me, everybody that we're talking to is saying, show us what other people are doing. What's working? How can we model what we're doing? Because this is unprecedented for us and we're not 100% sure. Can you give us some proof or give us some success stories? Do you have any? I mean, I know you work with a lot of different companies. What are people doing right now that is working? Or maybe if we're not, I don't think any of these models are very mature, because we're all kind of moving day by day here. But what are companies planning for? What are you seeing working out in the market right now?
Yeah, and something we hit on earlier too is we're starting to see 2020 was kind of the year of education. Education, conversation, kind of that reset period. And then what we've started to see in 2021 is some of the action items that are happening after that, of what are companies actually doing. To your point, everyone wants to know, what are my competitors doing? What are the Facebooks and Googles doing of the world? And a lot of that, headlines, trend lines, what's being voiced out there of saying like, we're 100%, everyone's going back to the office 9 to 5, or we're 100% remote. What does that actually mean? So when we're actually talking with these companies, every company that we're talking to, so no matter what industry it's in, if it's healthcare, pharmaceuticals, technology, insurance, law firms, are going to be converting more to flex. Now, if you ask them, what does that mean and what does that look like? The answer is different, or the answer very oftentimes is we don't know yet. Right? We're trying to figure that out. And then it goes back to kind of those pain points, or what can we do now? What can we solve for now? Or what pieces can we put into place to help us figure out what that strategy looks like? And I think there's a few organizations that have started doing things, and a lot of this was in action pre-pandemic. It's obviously shifted, but you're seeing companies like EY, for example, that did a large agreement with IWG. So over in Europe, of basically enabling all of their employees up to a certain amount to have access membership. So to be able to go in and use these spaces on demand, or for the day, week, month, whatever the case may be, outside of their headquarter location. So that another term that I'm sure everyone's heard is that like hub and spoke, right? But again, what does that look like? Is that hub and spoke on a global level? Is that hub and spoke on a regional level? Is that hub and spoke within a city? Because you can have a Chicago downtown office and then some suburban locations, or a downtown loop location, then a River North and a West Loop location. So you're starting to see them put in some of these flexible solutions to enable their employees to really have the optionality and the capabilities to go in and use these, so that they can go back and actually have the data to make decisions going forward. Right. So whether that's through, like I said, an EY, IWG, for example, or you're leveraging, a desk past Asana, Liquid Space, whatever the case may be, or working with the operator. So WeWork has their enterprise, Industrious has their enterprise. So seeing them do, put a lot of those solutions into practice right now. And they're, again, exploring things that they didn't think were possible. Right. For example, we were talking to one client and they were like, God, wouldn't it be great if, we're thinking about closing this suburban location. Like, what we would love to do is to have an operator come in and take half the space for us and manage it, kind of set up that agile suite, with the owner and kind of have everything set up to go. And he's like, but I know that they won't do that. It's like, well, they will now. Mm-hmm. Like, these are things that maybe 2 years ago, when we were first exploring, what could that look like, were kind of thrown out the window pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And now that's being put in place. Yeah. So we're seeing those solutions come together, where you're really seeing the occupier, the operator, and the owner work together to create this solution, which I get really excited about, because at the end of the day, that's everyone winning, right?
Definitely. We're looking at, we just actually integrated a sensor technology into our headquarters here in Chicagoland. And I know that for unassigned spaces and finding an open seat within an organization, that's becoming very popular. And it was around again before the pandemic, but now it's because of a lot of companies converting their hubs to hybrid hubs, that's more prominent than ever. Is it the same, Charlie, with buildings that want to become more flexible? How important is it that your building is smart? Is that a requirement of outfitting a space to be a flexible space?
Everything in your question right there falls back to data, right? Historically in the real estate industry, data falls in the heads of certain people. There's different technologies and platforms that have been trying to aggregate this data, but there is no one company that, monopolizes the data industry. I mean, there's groups like CoStar, obviously, that's, do that from the, marketplace side or the platform side for that. But there is no one single data source. For what you're talking about, the sensor technology, that data is paramount. It's critical. Some iteration of that has been delivered over the past decade, but we are definitively expecting a rise in, sensor technology because that helps companies that understand how they're utilizing their existing space. That helps building owners understand how that individual company is utilizing their space. And that data and information is key. All of a sudden, if everyone is aware of this, then that makes that negotiation, that makes that understanding of what that company needs in the future, something that the owner can then be able to say, all right, they're only using 50% of their space. If we want to retain them, let's provide some optionality. Let's be creative with how we're delivering whatever that is to support that company. The demand is driving everything in our industry. And we're advising companies to leverage the data, the resources that you have available at your disposal. And there's different, data sources. I mean, there's workplace experience apps that are on the rise, that continues to add value to these institutional owners. But how you leverage that data, how you integrate that in your overall asset management strategy, and how you respond to the, companies that you're trying to bring into that building. Another common phrase that Jillian said is that space as a service. We've got to get out of this arm length, lease negotiation at the end of the day, and check in every 5, 7, 10 years. Maybe you check in annually to see how companies are doing. But we're past that point. We're in the on-demand economy. With everything else that we do, with the exception of real estate, are we going to get to, a level where everything is going this way? No, we're not. But you need to be able to leverage that data, that information that is readily available, and, be able to think about how to use that to think about your portfolio strategy from the occupier side, or asset management strategy from, the ownership side.
Definitely. We all have a guest on the show in July who's a futurist, and he's adamant on our training call that data is the new oil. And I think you're both absolutely right. It's incredibly important.
I think I know exactly the quote that you're referring to right there.
Yeah.
I've used it in a presentation before.
Oh, good. Well, there you go. Well, you'll hear it again on this show too.
There you go.
You, in our planning call, Charlie, you used the phrase embracing disruptive forces. What does that mean, and why is it important?
Disruption is definitely a buzzword in the tech world, but we've already alluded to various other disruptive forces that have changed the travel industry, the, transportation industry, like the, food industry. We've got to get rid of some of these friction points that exist in commercial real estate. You can do that via technology. You can do that with data. And my perspective, and this is how we're, approaching our entire industry, how our team, et cetera, is challenge the status quo. There's tools, resources, technologies available today that go against everything that has historically been done in commercial real estate. And, we have to be willing to embrace that. The brokerage industry, there's certain brokers that refuse to admit that, change is happening. It's, and to me, that's going to be to their detriment at the end of the day. And that's one of the reasons we ended up joining, or I rejoined Avison Young, I should say, is, what Avison Young has the capability to do, because we're a privately held company. We can go against some of the legacy expectations of the brokerage industry, and, be able to, challenge ourselves and be a part of this change that we see coming. Again, it's the transactional mindset that is the brokerage industry historically, not going away, but we're turning more into true consultants, advisors. No matter how many brokers say they're consultants, advisors, they're not necessarily in every single scenario, because they're driving towards that transaction of what they know. But there's now so many different opportunities to support. It's not a single deal anymore. It is really thinking about all those different product solutions, how you're leveraging technology, how you're leveraging the different product mixes that are available out there. These are all disruptive to what we know. And it's all about thinking about how to leverage what's available to create that bespoke strategy for whatever your ultimate goal is, whatever side of the business we're talking about.
Well, and I was just going to chime in too from the occupier side, obviously with the pandemic and everything that took place, embracing that disruption was paramount. I mean, companies had to either adapt, be flexible, figure out solutions in order to react and communicate those as appropriate, or you do nothing. And what happens if you do nothing? I mean, are those companies still around anymore? So it's, truly looking at that of how do we, kind of reset where we are now and push that going forward. And there are some organizations, to be frank, that, we've had conversations for over a year and they may go back to the traditional ways of doing things. Now, how are their employees going to respond to that? Probably not well, but it's also that data and leveraging that to actually push forward the decisions. That data, and I would say the other major thing is we're seeing a lot more from the HR side, being involved or having a seat and a voice at this table for employees that they're bringing on, of how do they want to work, what options are we giving them, where are we hiring employees. Those are all very important things that I think were starting to happen in some scenarios and, have just been accelerated drastically throughout this.
You talked before about extremes. Like you hear the companies that say we're 100% in person, we're 100% remote, and maybe most companies fall within some level of that. I think a lot of businesses were forced into the only remote, and now they're starting to make that return back to some extent to a workplace, to an office. And you just mentioned that going back to the way it was before, the tradition. Why would a workplace still be relevant for an occupier? Why would they say, this has been effective maybe, working remotely, but there's still a place, there's still some way that the traditional office is relevant. What are you hearing from customers?
So, I mean, I certainly think that the office is relevant. It's just, what does that term, the office, mean?
Yeah.
It's not the office, it's an office or a solution, right? That might be something closer to your home. It might be a meeting room collaboration space for the day. The office space is relevant. And I think that, candidly, some of the clients that we've spoken with that are going in the direction of just kind of going back to what they knew before. I don't know why. I mean, Charlie, I don't know if you have a better answer, but it's one of those things.
My quick answer to that is, we've all seen in the press and all these different releases about, there's been an evolution over the past 12, 15 months about how companies are even disclosing what their strategies are going to be. We've been talking to some of those same companies that have been making some pretty bold statements around the return to the office. And again, even some of those that are taking this hard line approach about returning to the office, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be returning to the same office in every single scenario. It's, again, going to an office, not necessarily working from home, because work from home, we've proven, doesn't necessarily work for everybody. It works for some people. And, there was a company called Relogix that put out a analysis the other day. This is a sensor technology company that you've got 20% of people will never want to go back to the office ever again. There's 20% that want to go back 100% of the time, 5 days a week. That's fine. Both of those are poles, and you've got to be able to figure out how to support each of those. It's that 60% in the middle that we're focused on. Because we've got to admit, work from home, not going away. Any company that tries to dictate or mandate that their company has to, or every employee has to go to it, if they're knowledge-based workers, they're going to lose at the end of the day. We'll see it unfold over, X year period. But if you try to dictate or mandate how people are working, you're going to lose those employees. And because they have the ability to do it. Same thing on the return to office. You're going to appeal to X% of people that want to go back to the office 5 days a week. It, again, has a place. And that 60% is what we're focused on. It's how you complement and supplement that work from home, what they need, and, delivering, it could be spaced by the hour, by the day. And for that, centralized office, how do you deliver more flexibility within that strategy, which does include some long-term leasing in there, but how you can actually think about delivering that flexible solutions to be able to expand, contract your portfolio as needs change. So you really can't talk about this binary decision of work from home or work from the central office. There is a big middle ground that most people are really not even aware of the different, products and solutions available to them. And that's what we've been educating both owners and occupiers on.
Yeah, I think choice is the big buzzword, right? Providing choice. And we could have an entire other episode on how do you effectively manage employees that have choice, and put together the right teams in the right places and spaces with the right tools and solutions. But I did want to ask you guys, because you had mentioned that you started with Avison Young a day before the quarantine. And I think you guys were able to get together in person like a week before, right? Like everybody had to go home. So the majority of your time with the team on Charlie's team has been remote. Yeah. When it kind of relates to leveraging or managing, working with distributed teams, from your own experience even, what advice do you guys have for organizations?
Yeah, so to your point, our entire team was always set up to be distributed, right? So I'm in Chicago, Charlie's in Dallas. We have team members, Toronto, San Francisco, New York, Dallas, DC, Atlanta. Am I missing anything here? So we were always set up to be remote. It was great because we were able to all get together as a group, put our, 30, 60, 90-day plans, our budgets, our goals. A week later, I spent my first day in the office downtown Chicago. Day after that, the shelter-in-place orders were put into effect. And, so everything that we had kind of put together, it just kind of blew up, if you will. So we, actively had already set up, ways that we were going to be engaging with one another. So on a weekly level, for all team calls, we have occupier groups getting together on another day. But it was really just kind of managing through that throughout the crisis, just like every other organization is doing, right? How are the Zoom calls, team calls going? Which ones are effective? Do we need a full hour? Do we cut back to 30 minutes? What are we focused on? What are we spending our time on? Do we feel supported? That we have the tools and resources there? Staying engaged and meeting people, going back into the office then for me, it was great because people that I had reached out to, engage with, had Zoom calls with, or we had been working on deals together with via, our virtual links, was able to meet in person, right. Which is fantastic. For me personally, I really appreciate that side of it. So it was, it was a process, right? And it's interesting because we were able to talk through it firsthand for clients as well, saying like, we are going through the same things that you are going through, and kind of hear some of the tips, tricks, what have you. Anything additional that I
mean, generally it all goes back to what are the tools, resources you're providing to your team members, or your individual employees, whatever the case may be, individual teams. They all have their own unique needs. How are you communicating? What are the means? That could be, communication, not only with the means of how you're communicating via technology or phone, text, everything is varying, but how are you trying to embody that culture, collaboration, and everything via communication around what's working, what's not? We can measure productivity. Every, role responsibility has different ways of measuring that. But you don't have to be in person. It's not that line of sight management that people think you have to have. It's not about, being able, you have to trust your employees at the end of the day that they're getting their work done and they can get their work done, whether they're, in site or not. And there's every role responsibility is different in terms of how you manage that, but it's really a function of really thinking about every individual team and not creating this, one model that we're going to use as an entire company when every individual or team or practice area works differently. So you really have to provide that optionality and how you communicate what's working, what's not, being willing to change, admit that you made a mistake doing certain things. That's okay. We've gone through various iterations on our team about what's working, what's not. We're in the middle of, some strategic conversations right now around certain things about what's working, what's not. But it's all boils back to, being willing and agile and flexible to really thinking about the best way to be productive as an individual team, to collaborate, some in person, some not. I mean, our team obviously being distributed is fine. And obviously we would love to get together more than we have, but that does not necessarily mean that Jillian is locked in her, home office. She's still going to on site to the Avison Young office. She's still going to various other places where she can engage, collaborate. And that's what I actually love is, people that we're seeing, where are you today? And whatever's working for you, and it changes. It could be that coffee house, to go back to some of those third place things, and that's fine.
Yep. Well, and I think you hit on one that I missed, and that is the biggest thing, I think, is that communication. Mm-hmm. So, as companies too are doing the surveys, asking employees, what's working from them, what would they like to see, but also communicating not all of these things can be expectations, right? Here's what we're looking at. Here's the metrics. Here's where we're at today. Here's our plan today. And that can change tomorrow. Yeah. But communicating that throughout this, from Avison Young as a whole, being able to do that in market by market, it's been a little bit different. And, I spent time down in Florida during the winter, so I'm not going to complain about that, had that optionality to be able to do that, and communicate and be distributed,
right.
In that sense.
And we've talked a lot. I mean, on this episode, we focus mostly on how internal teams work together, but we could even regroup for another episode on how do you engage with a customer or with a partner. Yours is such a relationship-based business with transactions with owners. And, there's a whole other component of flexibility when it relates to what are you doing outbound, right?
That's right. I mean, to that point right there, George, I was traveling pre-COVID. I was traveling most weeks, definitively every couple weeks. 3-4 days at a time. Most of those meetings where I was being called to go to certain locations, I've been operating off Zoom for years now. And I was like, we can get this done like now or tomorrow. If we need to prep for something, we don't have to wait 2-3 weeks in terms of, getting a flight and, working through whatever the logistics there are. That is not going away. There will still be in-person meetings, but I think every company is rethinking what their, travel budgets are. Why do you need to, travel all the time? Yes, you need to do it some of the time. And Lord knows, I can't wait for our team to be able to get back together as a collective, because it's a different vibe. It's a different feel. But you have to think about that right strategy. And I think more than anything, with this acceleration and this global remote work experiments that we've all been dealing with, people are more comfortable doing exactly what we're doing right here, connecting from thousands of miles away. And you can do that. And your network is not confined anymore to your local geography, 30, 50 miles away from you. The globe is our network now. We can connect with anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Very well said. And I did anticipate that this conversation would go fairly long based off of what you guys bring to the table. It's just it's inspiring and it's insightful, and I love it. If you have time, Charlie, I know we're running a tiny bit long. I'd love to just finish up with a couple short personal questions as it relates to your professional success. Jillian, has there been a resource in your career that's helped you get to where you're at today that's been useful to you?
So I can't think of one resource. I have to say network, so just the individuals that I've met, various different mentors, or overall just network, right? Throughout the years of being able to go to and ask questions or to field some of my ideas or thoughts about to describe, kind of what I'm looking to do, or does this make sense, and figuring out how that can kind of all work together. So I would say that network component, and that can be, it's come from a variety of resources, everything from just personal connections, employees that I've worked with, to groups, Coronet, IFMA, NAIOP, recently just did a Real Innovation Academy course. So I think that those things, so always staying staying in touch with other individuals and figuring out like, what are you doing? What are you saying? What's working? What's not working? What can I answer for you? And also like, can you answer this for me? So I would say that's been the biggest part, is just the network as a whole, of just kind of staying involved in that and active in that as much as possible.
Cool. Charlie, how about a question for you? You're in leadership. When you've looked up to other leaders in your career, what are some of the effective characteristics that they've shared?
And I always go back to leaders that empower their individuals to be individuals. I mean, my first boss in commercial real estate was, my MD at Colliers. I was a 22, 23-year-old, knew nothing, nobody. And I came to him with different ideas, thoughts, strategies, whatever. And he basically said, go do it. He supported me in that function, despite my age, despite my ignorance. Did I make mistakes? Of course. Did I learn from them? Absolutely. So it's all about that, right combination of, you have to treat each individual as, just that, an individual. Having those leaders, the mentors that I had, understanding who I was, I think obviously you can tell I'm, willing to challenge the status quo. I'm willing to embrace the change, and having people that, really supported that, have been critical to me. I partnered with let's call it a much older generation, for a while, for, a 5-7 year period of my career. But I decided to split from that because I was wanting to push the envelope a little bit more than he was comfortable doing. And, you have to be willing to, make some of those changes. And I'll just go back to what Jillian said, the network. Everyone's network is different, right? But, beyond the industry organizations in our world, it's the GWAs, it's the Juicies, it's people that are, and that's on the supply side of the business, from the co-working side, but the core nets, understanding what other people are doing. The Real Innovation Academy, Jor Polig, Anthony Slumbers, for anyone listening to this that has never heard of them, look them up. From their blog posts, from their thought leadership. Candidly, they were some of the inspiration for some of my thoughts for kind of where the world is going. And you can go back to some of their blogs from 5-7 years ago. What they forecasted happens. It's happening right now. It's actually going faster than what they had forecasted. And you have to be willing to think about, people that are, again, challenging the status quo. So that's where I navigate to in terms of some of those resources is, yes, the legacy leaders and people that are, looking to the past. Fine. I was a history major. You got to look to the past, of course, and figure out ways to evolve, to not make the same mistakes in the future. And that's something that I really just, get passionate around is those that are, challenging what's the industry has, basically trained everybody to fit into this one mold, and it's fine, but it's, not the way anymore.
Well, and I would say too, he kind of hit on a couple of the E's, right? The empower, the evolve, I would say empathize, educate, and entertain. So kind of like, as you mentioned before, is, when your employees or people that you're working with are coming to you, like entertain what they're saying, but also educate, what works, what doesn't, and empathize kind of where they're coming from. So those are just a few other, from a leadership standpoint.
And embrace. Disruptive
yeah.
forces, right?
There we go. Yeah, see, all the E's.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you both enough for the insight that you share, the time you've spent on the show today. This has been such an awesome conversation, and I'm excited to watch what you guys are able to accomplish over the next couple months, let alone a few years. I think you guys are doing some great work, and certainly in a field that everybody is very interested in right now. So thank you both so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.